by Molly Wisbey. I can't remember, I must admit, I haven't written down your exact job title, Molly, but I'll get you to introduce yourself in a moment. So tonight's session is on fueling optimally for athletics. There is a follow-up session next week for refueling. So basically the two do very much go hand in hand. So it's wise if you try to join us and register again for next week's event. I think we've already sent the invites out for those, so you can start registering now in advance. We will be recording tonight's session. We recorded the last session, so those of you that weren't aware of that, Tracy does have a copy. I think John's uploaded it onto YouTube as well. So that's available, and we'll be doing the same with the remaining workshops. So we're expecting around about 40 people joining tonight, so that's really good numbers. It's a cross section from the club, obviously made up of parents, coaches and athletes, some of the university athletes, and also some of our high performance athletes as well at the university that are all sitting in this evening. So really good cross session of athletes. Hopefully you'll find this session worthwhile. You'll get the opportunity to ask questions of Molly at the end, so please don't be afraid. That's what Molly's here for, to help. No question is a silly question, and she'll do her best to answer. So yeah, if you can just keep yourself on mute for now until we get to that stage towards the end, and I'm just going to hit the record button so I don't forget. Or John, if you wanted to take care of that for me, John Cooper.
Yeah, already done that, Paul.
Brilliant. Cheers, mate. Thank you. Right, over to you, Molly.
Cool. Thank you, Paul, and hello and welcome, everyone. I am Molly, and my job role at Solent is a lecturer in health and exercise nutrition. And I also have a background in sports nutrition, where I've worked in team sports as well as with one-to-ones, going all the way from recreational up to GB Olympic levels, so a good old background in sports nutrition there. And I'm just going to share my screen with everyone. I do have one question, which will be, can we just ignore that for now, which will be implemented during the chat just to get some engagement going. And hopefully I can see the chat, but if I don't, I will call on John Cooper to read out for me, please, if that isn't going to plan. And yeah, lots of questions at the end would be great, or if you have some throughout the chat, just whack them in the talk box and we can answer them at the end. So thank you all for joining, and today I'm just going to go through a whistle-stop tour, hopefully about 35 to 40 minutes, all about fueling for athletic performance. And I just want to bear in mind that we have lots of different events here and lots of different sports, and there's probably a wider range than what's on this screen. And we have lots of different physiological demands for those sports as well, which I'm sure we're all aware. But what I just want to really enhance is that we have one commonality, and we all need to fuel optimally for your own sport and who you are as a person. So being completely individual, so although we have our own sports and we're our own person, we all need to make sure we fuel optimally, and hopefully this presentation will give a good overview on how to do that. So nutrition impacts each stage of our exercising, so our training, our competing, which hopefully we'll go into a bit more in the next few months, as hopefully been brought out on the news on Monday, and then going into recovery. So today I'm going to focus more on training, and then next week will be more on recovering. So we're always going to be in one of those three different brackets, and today's will be focusing on the training. And then get further broken down into pre-training nutrition, during training nutrition, and post-training nutrition. And like I said, today we're all focusing on what we eat before we exercise, whereas next week it will be on post. And if we have any questions about during training nutrition for the longer events, feel free to ask me questions at the end about it, or if there's a big need for it and we really want to talk about it in more detail, then I'm more than happy to add it on to the presentation at the beginning of next week, so we can do during and post if people would like a feel about that one too. When we talk about nutrition, and especially fueling for nutrition, we like to use a hierarchy. So the bottom being energy balance, and really utilising energy in, so all the food we consume versus our energy out. And then the next important step we move up into is our macronutrients. So our carbohydrates, our proteins and our fats are main macronutrients. And then we move on to our timing. So when is the best time to consume our macronutrients? So is this better before, during or after? And when is that? As well as our supplements being the pinnacle of what we focus on. So the main thing which I would like to achieve from this pyramid is really focusing on the bottom and then working our way up. So making sure we have our correct energy intake, then moving on to the correct macronutrients, then our correct timing, and then the supplements being the things we add in. And supplements being key to what it says in the name and just supplementing the diet. So just adding on, bolting on if needed, but what we really need to achieve is all the things below that before we start going into the little 1%ers. And when we talk about energy balance, so the bottom of the pyramid, our main focus, we like to talk about having a balanced energy intake. So this is where our energy intake meets our energy expenditure. So we're just nice and balanced. If we have a negative energy balance, this is where we look to do weight loss. Okay, so we are expending more energy than we are intaking. And if we have a positive energy balance, then you'll probably guess it's the opposite. So we are gaining weight, so we are intaking, so consuming more energy, so food and drink, than what we are expending. So energy intake will include all of our food being our macronutrients, so carbohydrates, which have 4 calories per gram there. We also have our proteins, which have 4 calories per gram there, and our fats, which go up to 9 calories per gram, so more than double the amount of carbohydrates and protein. And then also we can't forget our fluids as well, including alcohol, as they also contain calories depending on our drink of choice. And then when we look at our daily energy expenditure, very briefly, it's made up of all these different components, being our basal metabolic rate, being the main amount, so how much we burn at rest. Our physical activity levels, it says 15 to 30% there, but it can also go up to 50 or 60% depending on our sport and how active we are, as well as our thermic effect of food, so our digestion and absorption of food through the body. So there we have our energy intake and our energy expenditure, and we look to balance them to be able to achieve optimal performance and be as healthy as possible. And when I like to talk about fueling, I like to mention it as the 3 W's of fueling. So a good takeaway point is to really focus on the why. So why do we fuel? The what, so what do we fuel with? And also the when, so when should we consume this fuel? And this is what the bulk of my presentation today is all going to be on. So hopefully we can have some good takeaway points and make some good notes or rewatch the recording to get some good solid information there to take away. So if it goes slightly wrong, I'm just going to show this video. Hopefully it works okay. You might have seen it before. I don't know if the sound's going to work, but if it doesn't, they don't really say anything anyway, so it doesn't matter.
The sound was working, Molly, but it seems to have slowed up now, the video.
Okay, can you see it at all?
Yes, can see the video, but it's kind of almost like it's buffering, so it's going through it frame by frame.
Okay, I will see if it helps. It's only about a minute long, so hopefully it'll be okay, but okay. No worries if not. I know technology's not great. Luckily it's my only video, so we won't have this problem again.
I think most people remember this video clip though.
Yeah, hopefully. Okay, I will pause it there. So hopefully we've all seen it all before. One of the Brownlee brothers not having a great finish for his long race in his triathlon. So this can't just be put down to fueling as the one factor, but can play a massive role. So if we don't get our fueling strategies right, we don't really want to end up in a situation where, like that happened with one of the Brownlee brothers on one of the triathlons a couple of years ago. But that situation could be seen as okay and could be fixable or easy to come back from for some rest. But if this goes on for a long time, or we're always consuming less than we are expending, it goes into a phrase which we call low energy availability. So the amount of energy available to carry out our essential functions after exercise energy expenditure is our energy availability. And if this gets really low, okay, then it used to be called the female athlete triad, where we would have low energy availability, low bone density, and irregular periods. But now it has all moved on to REDS, which is called relative energy deficiency in sport. And it looks to be on a continuum where the symptoms go slightly less and less, okay, and they get more and more problematic. So optimal body composition and energy being everything we want to aim for in that red circle, so in the green box, and then slowly moving down, being the inability to achieve maximal adaptation to training, impaired recovery and fatigue, menstrual disturbance, poor repair and stress fractures, so injuries, okay, and then hormone issues as well as impaired growth and development. So really important that we have enough fuel in our body to be able to prevent these things from happening. And there was a case study, I don't know if you've heard of it before, there is a documentary if you wanted to go and check it out afterwards, where there was a 1500-meter sprinter, and she was actually swimming as some cross training and did a tumble turn in the pool, okay, and actually broke her foot through that tumble turn, which is very unlikely to happen. And when she got her diagnosis, it came back as osteoporosis, and she was only 18 years old. And this was because the female hormone estrogen, which is essential for healthy bones, was so low due to her low energy intake that she actually got osteoporosis and therefore couldn't carry on training and had to move over to cycling. And I'm not trying to scare anyone, and I don't want to say this as a scare factor, but just to be aware of things that could happen if we aren't sufficiently fueling our body. Warning signs could be things like a missed or irregular periods, persistent fatigue, a drop in performance, poor recovery, a perception of effort increased, okay, lots of illnesses and injuries, changes in mood, a problematic relationship with food or training, as well as disrupted sleep patterns. So really important just to check in on yourselves and just make sure that we are all fueling correctly and feeling nice and energized in our sessions. And
sorry,
really
Molly, could you share your screen? It seems to have clicked off.
No worries. Do you know where we got up to?
Literally just the start of that slide, it clicked off.
No worries. We back?
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Sure. So hopefully everything that I've just said is on the slide there, and you can all read through those. And really important in the top right where it says that weight doesn't necessarily equal performance. So it's kind of like a bell-shaped curve. Okay, and if we go too far down the other side, then it actually can be detrimental to our performance in that part. Why are we focusing on fueling? I've done all the negatives of underfueling, but now focusing on why we are fueling and how to fuel. So to be able to train as hard as possible with optimal adaptation and recovery, to remain healthy and injury free, okay, so free from illnesses and free from all of our injuries, to support growth and development, and really important if we are at the younger years and trying to go through adolescence and peak growth time. So achieve a physique that is suited to your event, okay, and to perform the best, especially on your days of competition, so we don't do a Brownlee moment and lose our energy stores. And therefore we look to consume enough food, especially carbohydrates, at the right times to provide enough energy for both training and competition. And the analogy I like to use is a fuel tank analogy with a car. Okay, so we have a car, which could be us, the human body, and we like to have enough fuel in it, so enough calories in it for it to be able to work. As if you think about a car, and if we don't put enough petrol in it, then we won't get very far. And the second part of that is the car, so us as our human body needs to have the correct fuel in it, okay, to be able to go properly. So if we put petrol in a diesel car, it wouldn't go very far, or the other way around. So having the correct fuel lots of carbohydrates, which I'm going to go on to, instead of filling ourselves with less nutritional dense food, to be able to get the most from our performance and in our competition. So trying to prevent the sleepy dog on the left-hand side, and therefore filling up that battery and being able to compete to the best of our abilities. A little bit of how this works. So in the liver, our carbohydrates get stored as glycogen, and then they enter the bloodstream to either go to the brain to fuel our exercise or to get stored in our muscles. Okay, so glycogen being really key here as our storage form of carbohydrates. And we like to ensure that these glycogen stores are topped up to be able to help us go faster, jump higher and throw further and everything that your sport entails. And this is really important as our glycogen stores are limited. So even though our fat stores can keep us going for a longer amount of time, our glycogen stores are actually limited, and therefore we need to ensure that they are fully topped up before we train to be able to make the most out of our session. So what are carbohydrates, or what are our fuel that we're talking about? So the more and the higher intensity of exercise, the more we need. And for example, on a lower need day, it could be a rest day or a recovery day. So think about what your training looks like. So rest days, recovery days, or lower intensity and skill-based activities.
Whereas, I was seemed to be stuck on one screen, but it's come back now.
Okay, no worries. And then on a higher need, being a middle or long distance sport, combined sports, double training days, hard training days, or high intensity training sessions. So the higher the need, the more carbohydrates and fuel we need compared to a lower need day. And you can probably think about your own training and how that's all going to relate. So I'll move on to some examples. Okay, so just stating how much we love carbohydrates, and I like to use these as our fuel foods. Okay, so really fueling our exercise. If we can take one main thing away today, it is carbohydrates are our fuel foods, and we need more when we are training more. And if we think about carbohydrates, I'm sure we all have our favorites. I love some porridge with a banana on top, so lots of different examples here for breakfast. So we have things like Weetabix, breads, bananas, oats, some cereals, okay, and honey, dried fruits, some wraps. And then we can move on to lunch, so rice, breads again, some pasta, noodles, etc., and probably a lot more that you can think of which you like for lunch. And then if we move on to dinner, so very similar ones to lunch probably, but maybe a bit more adventurous, as we usually have a little bit more time or creativity. And then some good high carbohydrate snacks there as well. And I like to put in the amount of carbohydrates, is we're going to go into how much we need in a minute, and then we can talk about what that relates to in food terms, so we can look back at these and match the two together. So I just like people to type in the chat. I can actually see it as I have got my second screen up, so hopefully it works. What has everyone had pre-training today or yesterday or usually, and does that differ if we are having a really early morning workout? You can speak out loud if you want to. I can't actually see you, but you're more than welcome to speak.
I usually just have pre-workout women's best, or like just a banana before I normally do exercise in the morning.
Okay, cool, nice. A good banana, so a good source of carbohydrates. Thank you for sharing. Does anyone else have any ideas? Oats before evening training, lovely, nice, Sonia. Anyone else feel like overnight oats in the morning? Nice, Sarah. So lots of oat lovers too. Cool. Thanks, guys. Banana and porridge. Nice. My favourite as well. Cool. So nice to see that we are all getting our carbohydrates in too. Porridge from Rob. Peanut butter and chia seeds. Lentil, spinach, chickpea curry. Very nice. There's some carbohydrates in chickpeas and lentils too, as well as some protein. So some good stuff there. Weetabix, cool. Mentioned Weetabix, a good one there, especially for younger people, as it's easier to eat and quite tasty. Cool. Thank you everyone for sharing. Feel free to continue putting those in the chat if you feel free to, and I can always look at them. Lots of pasta, love pasta, good one. Nice. So we're all getting our carbs in already, which is what we love to see. And when we're talking about the different amounts, okay, so if we have a higher training day, like I mentioned, our longer sessions, our higher intensity sessions, our double training days, then we like to say that half of our plate, so that is our blue for our carbohydrates, okay, so our fuel foods, our fueling plates being half full of carbohydrates, and carbohydrate source of your choice being pasta, oats, rice, whatever we feel like we need. And then we like to have about another section, okay, so the other side being of protein in that orange, okay, so a protein source. And I'll go more into protein next week, but also really important to mention it being spread out throughout the whole day. Lots of fruits and vegetables too, okay, so that yellow one, so really preventing illness and keeping up with our immune health as well, with our antioxidants through there. And then also a little bit of fat for our essential functions, so fats are also essential in the diet, just less essential when we have higher demand training days, okay. And then when this swaps to a lower demand, so say our rest days, our recovery days, say our mobility sessions and things like that, or if you're just swapping it for an active recovery walk or whatever you feel the need to do, then we usually reduce our carbohydrates slightly and add in a bit more fat and a bit more protein. So these are kind of how our fueling plates look. But if we don't like the look of that or find it easier to talk about, then we can always go back to using our hands. So we can talk about having, for carbohydrates, our fuel foods, just a massive fistful, depending on the size to go on our plate. Okay, so just something to think about there. And when we're talking about our pre-training meal, so everything that we've mentioned in the chat, this looks in terms to be 1 to 4 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram. So I put some examples on the left-hand side, and then I'll talk about how that looks actually through food. And then the higher the amount, for the higher the intensity. Okay, so just have a think in your head on what that might be and how much we might need. So I have an example of a 50 kilogram jump athlete, so needing between 50 grams to 200 grams pre-training. So this could be a bagel and a banana. So referring back to those photos which I mentioned, okay, the carbohydrate sources and the amounts in the grams. So about a bagel and a banana, or we could just think of that being half of our plate or a massive fistful. Okay, so lots of different ways depending on how we like to think about it. So in photo form, we could have our, say, our bagel at lunch, and obviously it won't probably just be a plain bagel. We would have our chicken or our tofu or our hummus or something on top. And then our snack, okay, and then we would go to training. And then we'll talk about the other red circles next week. So a good example there. Or say we are doing more further distance, okay, or slightly heavier, then this will go up slightly. So we might want to add in another bagel and some orange juice there to really up our carbohydrate content. And in food form, that might look a bit like this through photos, okay. So lunch, we might have our 2 bagels with our toppings of choice, and then our orange juice, okay, and then with our snack, our banana, and then we head out and do our training session. However, for a rest day, like, we can't just cut carbs completely. I would never suggest that, but just to lower them slightly, so just having a bagel, okay, by itself. So quite lonely on that page, but the bagel there, so slightly reducing our carbohydrate concentration and consumption because we are exercising to a lower amount of intensity. Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense in a visual format. Just a recipe there if we wanted to take away something a bit different, which people might not be as familiar with. So just a nice, it's called shakshuka, really nice. If mainly you can adapt it to whatever carbohydrate content you want as well by adding in some bread on the side, and we can look at those when the slides get handed out or the pre-recording too, just to take away. We also have the when of fueling. Okay, so we've gone through the why do we need to fuel, the what, so what do we need to fuel with, and now we are moving on to the when. So when do we need to consume all of these carbohydrates that we are talking about? And the recommendations are having our main meal about 3 to 4 hours before the session. So this would be our bagel or our 2 bagels or whatever we choose. Okay, about 3 to 4 hours usually works the best for it to be able to get digested and absorbed and to be able to be retained into the body, okay, and really go through and settle. And there's some just examples of photos there. And then if we want to top that up before we actually go out to training and feel like we need a bit more energy or a bit more fuel, then 30 minutes to an hour before, we like to have our snack or small meal just to boost up our glycogen stores to make sure that we are ready to go for our full capability. And again, just building in those plates, okay, so what those 3 to 4 hour meals before might look like. Examples could be our oats, okay, so we have our carbohydrates with our bananas there and some peanut butter on top. I know we've had that mentioned in the chat, or some scrambled egg on toast with mushrooms and spinach. Tuna pasta salad, lots of different things there. Bean chili if we want to go a bit more vegetarian, okay, or vegan, depending on your needs and your preferences, allergies and everything like that to take into account. So some hours, so 2 to 4, 2 to 3 before training. I'm just having our main meal, which we would usually have, trying to fill out that fueling plate, which I mentioned on this slide here. And then just another example there, just being some apple and cinnamon porridge. So one I like to have quite frequently. So oats just with some fruit and flavourings on top too. But what about if it's an early session? So I heard someone in the chat say they like to have a banana beforehand. And ideally, we like to avoid fasted training as much as possible. And I'm sure some of your sessions are easier to fit in, say, before a day at university or before a day training or at school or at work. Okay, so depending on when's best to fit in the session, it is recommended to avoid fasted training as much as possible. If we prefer to be fasted due to avoiding a heavy stomach and things like that, then we want to really restrict it just to 2 sessions per week, and our easiest sessions and less than 60 minutes of length of that session. Okay, so really avoiding that fasted training. And the reason behind this is because if we remember back to that blood glucose glycogen slide, our liver glycogen when we wake up is completely gone. Okay, so we won't have any liver glycogen, and therefore we won't have as much fuel to be able to fuel that session. So more likely to not feel our best or perform our best during that session. However, if we don't like to eat in the morning, feel really sick, or we don't want to wake up at silly o'clock in the morning, the main recommendations are to have a high carbohydrate meal the night before. So ensuring we go to bed with lots of carbohydrates in our stomach, okay? Or just having a high carb snack before our meal. So I'll show you again that snack slide in a minute. So something like a banana, some orange juice on the slide here, just something, just a little refreshment to be able to get some carbohydrates in. But the main thing being refueling with a big breakfast. So if we don't have much before the early session, ensuring we have a big breakfast after that. And I'll go into more of that next week. These are example snacks which we can either have 30 minutes to 1 hour before our training session, if it's say in the afternoon, or before we actually go out in the morning. So all down to personal preference. There are some more examples as well, but all things that can hopefully sit in the stomach quite well to avoid that. But if worse comes to worse, something like an orange juice or a glass of milk is the best option too. Or we can do a homemade smoothie, okay, so adding in a carbohydrate source, a liquid source and a fruit, or some people like to put vegetables in. And really quick and easy to make in the mornings, doesn't take much time to eat or drink that at all. And my personal favourite would be a banana, some milk, some berries and some spinach, and making a nice carbohydrate dense smoothie there to be able to take out just before I go out training. So being able to have a small amount of a lie-in, but still getting some good nutrition to fuel that session. We can also have some banana muffins, which is another recipe there for everyone to take away, and I won't go through that now, but just one which we can always refer back to. We do also need to be conscious of what we want to avoid in this 1 hour to 30-minute window. So we want to avoid foods which are really high in protein, okay, really high in fat, really high in fibre, and low in GI, which is their glycemic index. And the reason this is because they take a long time to break down, and therefore you might get some stomach issues or feel sick during training or have some dreaded accidents wherever you are. So the key things to avoid here are those foods high in protein, high in fat, high in fibre, and low in GI due to that breakdown. And high fibre foods are found in things like oats, okay, beans and pulses, root vegetables, whole grain products, nuts and seeds. So really trying to avoid those in that 30 minutes to 1 hour beforehand. When we're talking about GI foods, so the higher the GI is, the quicker it goes into our blood glucose. So what we like to have just before our training session, like our bananas, our sports drinks, which I mentioned, our fruit juices, for example, whereas our lower GI, which we want to avoid before our training sessions, like in that 30-minute, 1 hour window, would be our vegetables, our whole grains, our pulses and our oats. Okay, so just being able to be aware of how quickly they get digested and absorbed in the body to be able to be used as energy. But just really important that this doesn't necessarily relate to their nutritional value. So I'm not saying that the higher GI cornflakes are high in nutrition. I'm just saying that they are easier to digest and therefore can go straight into the blood glucose. And this is really important to just mention about health versus performance food. And I'm happy to discuss this in more detail, but there's quite a debate that goes on in nutrition with working with other nutritionists, as some of the foods they mentioned on the left-hand side here aren't always what we classify as the most healthy food, okay, but great as a performance food. So if someone was just having a sedentary job and a sedentary lifestyle, I wouldn't necessarily recommend them to have cornflakes, sweets and sports drinks constantly. And that's the difference between having a health food and a performance food. And I'm really happy to go into a lot more detail about my thoughts around this if people seem to disagree. And obviously getting your fruits and vegetables and whole grains and everything in like that is really important. But I think it's just worth noting that there is a time and a place to implement these, whether that is during a long run, at half time in a game or something, as well as just before a session if needing an extra boost. And then we also can't forget hydration. So just to round up with hydration, and something that's not very fun to talk about, but looking at your urines and making sure it is the right colour. And what we like to go for is our straw coloured, okay? So looking at our urine and seeing if it's the right colour, being nice pale straw coloured. And if we don't have enough fluid in our body, so if we are dehydrated, it does look to decrease our power, okay, increase our effort in the session, decrease our digestion, our energy, and increase our reaction and decision-making time, which are all really important aspects to be able to fuel optimally and perform at our very best. Okay, so really important there. And this is also really important as our body is about 60% water, okay, and it looks to be that 2% of body mass lost during exercise is where performance can be impacted. So making sure that we start exercise in a really hydrated state. And the recommendations for that are mainly water, okay, or squash is completely fine, flavoured water, adding fruits and vegetables to your water, lots of fruit as well in food form can be really hydrating, things like berries, watermelon, dairy products too, as well as your teas and things like that. So lots of different fluids recommended there. And in quantities, it looks to be about 6 to 8 glasses per day, whether you are training or not, but the more you train, the hotter the condition, etc., the more you will need. And then the recommendations just before training are about 400 to 600 millilitres, about 2 hours before. So probably the generic water bottle that you can find in a supermarket, something like that, just sipping on it until you start training, not just downing it all at once. So to summarise, I've been speaking for about 40 minutes or so. Energy balance is crucial to perform at your best. Carbohydrates are the king macronutrient for training, so the more the better. Having a high carbohydrate meal 3 to 4 hours before training is great. Having our bulk meal then, okay, and then topping up with our high carbohydrate snack about 60 minutes before, and ensuring that our hydration is also optimal. And then again, just trying to say the difference between the two. So having low calories, low carbohydrates can lead to poor performance, whereas if we do consume enough food, it can give us enough energy for training. Lots of carbohydrates, great performance, and we can hit our target times. I've just provided some handouts and activities for everyone too. So it's kind of like a day in the life of carbohydrates. So if you wanted to, you could print that off or create your own or write it down. It's just a good reminder of how we can fit those into our day to ensure we are eating enough, especially pre and post training. And then kind of a little infographic just to explain what carbohydrates are, what they're used for, okay, and when to consume them before going into next week's session. So please do keep in touch, and thank you everyone for listening. I will be doing the refueling version next week, but if you did want to follow my Instagram just for some recipes or evidence-based information, it's just Molly Wisbey Nutrition, or further questions, just email me on my Solent email, which is molly.wisbey@solent.ac.uk. And thank you. Does anyone have any questions? I will stop showing my screen. I appreciate I went through a lot of content in about 45 minutes, so I apologise if it was a bit overwhelming, but luckily it has been recorded, so we can go through it at our own pace. Thanks everyone.
So if anybody does, please speak up. See, Alan, you've got your hand up. I don't know if that's deliberate or whether you didn't realise. Did you have a question, Alan? Your microphone's off, Alan.
All right. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for the session. Appreciated that, Molly. But I would appreciate your thoughts on vitamins.
Yes. Okay. Brill. Any particular vitamin or particular thought about them?
Well, I didn't used to take any at all, and having a particular problem with UTI, I took some cranberry supplements, which I continued. I have some vitamin C, vitamin D, and some multivitamins, but I'm never quite sure exactly. My wife takes quite a few vitamins. She runs long distance. I'm not quite sure when I should take them, how I should take them, or what benefit they do me. You know, there's a lot of arguments about if you don't need them, then the body just flushes them through. So just appreciate your thoughts.
Yeah, really good question, Alan. Thank you for that. I would definitely go back to the food first approach when it comes to vitamins and minerals. I know I didn't really cover much of that today, but definitely really important in the diet, our vitamin and minerals for a whole range of functions, okay, especially our immunity and our immune health. The one which I really want to focus on is vitamin D. So it is recommended that everyone takes a vitamin D tablet, especially from the months of October to March, so where we are now. And that is mainly because vitamin D is synthesized by the sunlight. And during those months, we don't get much sunlight, okay? So being able to have a tablet is recommended by the government and the NHS for everyone, not including everyone, to have a vitamin D tablet every single day. So I definitely recommend one of those. Again, I would just look first at the diet and ensuring that we can get it through food form. And then if we say we have, if we're in like a veganism diet, then that is harder to get our vitamins and minerals. We might look to supplement there with things like B12, but generally we should be able to get enough of our food, get our vitamins and minerals through our food. It's just that one vitamin D where we would like to supplement. Okay.
Okay.
Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks very much. Very helpful.
Thank you.
Noel, I think Noel's got his hand up at the moment as well.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Molly. Great presentation. You mentioned in passing fasted training and didn't recommend it. But in some schools of marathon training fasted, at least on occasion, is strongly recommended. Is the thinking on that changing, or is it still the same?
There's a new concept that's kind of been brought out, which is called fuel for the work required, around carbohydrates training and fasted training. And the reason which I am trying to not recommend it is mainly due to all of those aspects I mentioned about low energy availability and relative energy deficiency in sport. And it's really been researched where if we're doing fasted training, then those symptoms are more likely to occur because we're just running off of empty stores. However, there are also research to look at if we are doing fasted training, we can have a bigger training adaptation and more mitochondrial adaptations and therefore enhance our training. But it does really have to be carefully planned and considered, and therefore really only recommended for low intensity short work. So it's definitely becoming more popular in research, especially in the up and coming years as well, but that's kind of what we try to say at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Great.
John.
Hi, Molly. Couldn't resist. I just wondered, you mentioned the differences between sort of body mass and how that might impact grams that you should intake of carbs. You also mentioned intensity. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on sort of a few different types of training, and if there are any sort of subtle changes between them, sort of between maybe like more power-based things like jumps and sprints versus the longer distance stuff versus more like resistance and kind of S&C based training. Would you reckon they're all pretty similar, or would you do something slightly different?
I would suggest the more endurance type of sport, the more carbohydrates they would most likely need compared to a jump or sprint resistance training, mainly due to the energy demands of the sport as well, and through what recommendations state there. And by saying that, I don't mean a massive difference, just slightly. So probably about, in total, about 4 grams per kilogram for the day for, say, a resistance base or a sprint jump base, and that jumping up to about 6 for an endurance based athlete. So not loads, but literature and research likes to favour more carbohydrates for more like the endurance type work compared to more of a resistance basis as well.
Thank you.
Also, mainly, John, just to go through that a bit more, because we mentioned our glycogen stores, and they are more likely to be depleted through our endurance sessions compared to our strength-based sessions, which it looks to show. So more glycogen depletion kind of means we need more in the first place to be able to meet those needs.
So I've got no good excuses for fueling up before a big strength session. I'll try and avoid doing that.
Oh no, we love fueling. This is what it's all about, but it's just the right amounts.
Maybe that's where I'm going wrong.
Maybe not the whole bag of Haribos beforehand.
You've caught me there.
Does anyone else have any questions? I can't see the chat very well. It's gone a bit blurry, so I don't know if there's any in there.
There's no more hands up other than Alan's hand is still in the air. His arm must be getting very tired now. You haven't got another question, Alan? No, okay, that's fine. So so the session is being recorded. We will get John to reshare that with you as a YouTube link. And thank you for attending this evening. Thanks for Molly's time. Again, for all of you, if you've attended this evening, it's definitely worth you attending next week as well, because there is a correlation between the two. So hopefully we'll see more faces and some familiar faces again next week. So thank you very much, guys. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Molly.
Thank you. Excellent session.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah,
If
really
anyone
good.
has any recommendations, if they want to add anything in next week, they can just let us know as well.
How to write a diet plan for a middle-aged man. How about that? Who eats as much as he used to when he was training hard, and he no longer does.
Can I go and have tea now? Starving.
Yeah, I can hear your stomach from here, John.
That's really good. Thank you, Molly. Very pragmatic, sensible.
Thank you.
John, did you stop the recording?
I haven't yet, but I genuinely just remembered another question. And it was, you know, you were talking about female athlete triad and you moved it on to reds.
Yeah.
My question then was, is there a subtle difference in the demands between males and females pre or post training, or is it they're the same, it just seems to be of a higher risk within female athletes?
The second one usually. So it's normally a higher risk within the female athletes, mainly due to hormone issues, as well as, not issues, but hormones, as well as from past experiences. And in what we try to observe or see is that females aren't as great as actually getting the right nutrition in and the right amount of nutrition in. So I know that eating disorders and things like that have increased, and especially in the female population compared to the males, not disregarding the males at all, that it's still prevalent, but more in females. And that's kind of how that all got brought about as well.
So I feel like there's even more of an excuse if there's a female group of athletes to have a pre-training Josie's 2 to 4 hours beforehand.
Yeah, basically.
I'm also stealing that recipe for banana muffins. That's happening.
What? I don't know what Josie's is, John. I'm very behind the times. Where have I been? Is it a Southampton thing?
It's a Hampshire thing.
A Hampshire thing.
Just a very, very good chain.
There's one in Romsey.
Okay, I'm not too far away. Maybe when Boris lets me, I'll venture down just for one of those.